Bueno, buenos días con todos y con todas. Para mí es un enorme placer tener la oportunidad de traer a la profesora Zillah Eisenstein aquí a FLACSO, a Ecuador. El sentido de su charla se enmarca en la necesidad que vimos desde el programa de género de empezar estas jornadas sobre acción política de las mujeres desde lo que ha sido una larga experiencia histórica del movimiento feminista, de los movimientos feministas globales, precisamente de buscar acciones políticas locales y nacionales inspiradas también y moldeadas por movimientos globales. Esto no es una novedad de esta época, ya desde comienzos del siglo XX, los movimientos feministas, los primeros movimientos feministas se plantearon, fueron influenciados y se moldearon a través de procesos globales, transnacionales, de intercambio más allá de las naciones, de sus posturas y de sus proyectos políticos. En ese sentido, para nosotros es muy importante iniciar estas jornadas precisamente con una de las figuras más importantes del feminismo global, que ha estado durante más de 30 años trabajando precisamente en esas redes globales, en esos contactos y procesos entre diversos feminismos, no solo en Estados Unidos, sino en otros lugares del mundo, y reflexionando sobre precisamente estos procesos locales, nacionales y su incidencia, y tratando de pensar la acción política de manera global. Quiero presentar a la profesora Zillah Eisenstein. Muchos de ustedes la conocen, es una de las feministas marxistas más renombradas en el mundo. Ahora es profesora de ciencia política en Ithaca College, autora, editora de uno de los libros más influyentes dentro del feminismo marxista, que fue Patriarcado Capitalista y Feminismo Socialista, que marcó el devenir de varias de las líneas y dimensiones del feminismo estadounidense y que luego se expandió a otras latitudes. Ha sido también durante estos últimos 30 años una luchadora incansable y teórica de cómo pensar coaliciones políticas, ha reflexionado sobre el movimiento de mujeres, las relaciones entre feminismo y socialismo y la organización sindical, en la lucha contra los fundamentalismos, en la articulación entre feminismo, entre racismo, sexismo y los fundamentalismos, y ha reflexionado sobre muchísimas otras latitudes. Es para mí un honor introducir entonces la charla, la conferencia de la profesora Zillah Eisenstein. Bienvenida, Zillah, y te cedo ahora la palabra. Thank you.
Buenos días. That's it. But if you looked in my car, you would see vocabulary lists of every food, every meal, every donde. So I am working on it, but I can't do political thinking in Spanish, and so I apologize. Because I can't, my talk is going to be an argument, and I'm going to be looking at you, hoping you're looking back at me. I don't want you passive, thinking that I'm going to tell you anything, because I won't. All right? What I will do this morning, hopefully, is create chaos. Intellectual chaos, so that maybe you can act in this political moment. Your political moment here reminds me of my own. Can you see my button? Well, it says, "Not my president." And it's a picture of what some of us in the feminist movement say, fuckface, okay? Did you translate that? Thank you. All right, so I thought what I wanted to do is make sure that we have time for questions, because actually questions are what we need right now. I wish we were ready for the answers. Now, that said, I think I have a few, and I will share them with you, but they should be interrogated by you. And I would say that at this moment, you have no choice but to know who you are politically and act on it in this next election you face, just like we had to do in the United States. Actually, white women did not do very well for the insurgent feminism that we are trying to grow. Many of those white women ended up voting for Trump, enough of them that he got a coalition to win. What I think you want to be asking yourselves is, what do you want to happen here, even if it's not what you want? And then make sure to act in some coalitional form that gets you closer to where you want to go. But the huge responsibility that you have, and I have had and have in the United States, is that whoever you vote for, you really must become the resistance that makes something better happen. Electoral politics is never enough. Mass mobilizations and resistances are what we can count on. In the US, the only good thing that has happened with Trump being elected, it has mobilized our country in all our diversity to fight against some of the most anti-democratic policies that we have seen in many years. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is share with you some of my favorite thoughts. And they jump around, but you can jump with me and do fine. Okay? But just jump. All right? And think, can I go there or not? And if you can't go there, figure out why not. Okay? So, the one thing that you get as you live, and I've lived longer than some of you in this room, is that you can't escape history, you can't get ahead of history, but you can get behind it. So in other words, what I'm asking us to think about is, where are we in this moment? I actually think that feminist theory, feminist thinking, is behind the actions that are happening. In other words, that we have not quite caught up, at least not in the United States, and I think not in terms of global feminist challenges, to really what the political contradictions are that we need to face. In other words, I think our theory, feminist theory, is lagging behind our actions. Now, what does that mean? Well, in the US, the day after the inauguration of Donald Trump, this was January 21st, more than several million women and men who support women were in the streets in Washington, D.C. and throughout our country. This is unheard of in the United States. Millions of people in the street saying, no, you are not our president. What was amazing, though, was a lot of that mobilization came from the fact that many, many women in the US were furious that Hillary Clinton had not won, and that a racist, misogynist pig who grabs pussy got elected. Okay? So the point here, I mean, it's who would believe, right? So, but the issue is that I have spent the better part of my feminist life criticizing Hillary Clinton. I have always argued that she is not my kind of feminist. When she says, let's break the glass ceilings, I have always said, let's get us out of the basement first. So the idea that she is a feminism for the 1%, as the Occupy movement might say, as opposed to a feminism for the 99%. In other words, for women of every color, every race, every class, every sexual identity, every gender non-conforming way of being, if that's the feminism that you're interested in, that has never been Hillary Clinton's feminism. It is a feminism for corporate, global capitalism, and it is not for traditional patriarchy, but for a modernized neoliberal patriarchy. So you can be feminist and still be patriarchal. In other words, there are different kinds of patriarchy. There are different kinds of racism. There are different kinds of imperialism. So there must be what? Different kinds of feminism. So you just don't know how troubled I was when she got the candidacy, when she was running for president, and I thought, oh my goodness, she's going to win. And then they are going to say, we, meaning women, have won. So talk about being between a rock and a hard place, Donald Trump here, Hillary Clinton there, what to do. So I feel for you in your election, but it's nothing compared to the vehemence of what was happening, because Hillary Clinton did not just represent neoliberal feminism in the United States. She represented it globally. When she became Secretary of State, she said, women's rights will be the leading concern of U.S. foreign policy. And I'd really like to ask the women in Afghanistan, Yemen, even Saudi Arabia, well, how are the women's rights doing for you? Okay, so I don't want to talk too much more about the United States. You know, we do that enough in our imperial gaze. What I do want to do, though, is just give you a few thoughts about how I think we need to be thinking, and also what some of the difficulties in the thinking are. Okay? So recently in the US, there was a new ruling that said, and this was really important in terms of constitutional rights, it said that corporations were the same as people. In other words, they had people rights. So this morning, they must have known I was coming to speak to you, New Zealand declared that a river has the same rights as a person. Okay, this is, again, the idea that, you know, whose rights are we talking about? What kinds of rights? Whose world, whose earth, whose water, all right? So what I think is interesting is that in the US, corporations are said to be people, but the people that they are saying have rights are rich and white and male. But in terms of what I said to you when I started, that's kind of historically lazy, because it's much more complicated than that today. Today, neoliberalism comes in all colors and all genders. So the point here is that you have rights in neoliberalism as women, as blacks, as brown, as indigenous peoples, but the rights, of course, are constructed and narrowed to the needs of global corporate capitalism. So the point here is that some of the homogeneity, the idea that feminism is about women, that patriarchy has only one formation of it, it's just not good enough today. We need much more complex thinking because neoliberal capitalism comes in the form of neoliberal feminism as well. Okay, are so you with me so far? The idea here that it's just, you can't, you know, one of my more recent books is called Sexual Decoys. And what is a sexual decoy? The idea that you see a female and you think you have what? The issue of women's rights or women's liberation or women's freedom. Whereas many of the imperial leaders today come in female bodies. So in other words, you just better be careful what you see when you look. All right? And the idea here is complexity, intersectionality, right? And not a predefined homogeneity. So in other words, to find solidarity, which is what I'm always looking for, don't look for unity. Look for trust, look for courage, look for urgent action. I don't have to agree with everything you do to trust that you want to struggle together in solidarity against global, racist, capitalist, heteropatriarchy. Now, there are lots of people who say the problem is capitalism, and no. I just told you what the problem is. It's the only thing I'll tell you today. But it's multiple, it's complex. If you don't use the language that lets you see, you cannot see it. So the traditional Marxism, a traditional feminism, is not good enough for the moment we inhabit. We have a complex problem. So when the Pope, a year ago, everyone thinks the Pope is really great. And I know where I am, so I will be deferent. Although I'm an atheist Jew, so I don't have to be really deferent, all right? I was lucky enough to be brought up in the United States by communist parents. So, you know, atheism was just part of who I was. When I tried to figure out why is this happening, I never had an escape about why it's happening. It's us, okay? So the idea here, though, the Pope, when the Pope, people say he is the most egalitarian Pope ever. He believes that capitalism is a problem. Me, what do I think? No abortion? No women's rights? No critique of patriarchy? The most democratic what? So the idea here again is, what do we see and what do we not see? Is it good that he understands that poverty is a problem? Absolutely. Is it abhorrent that he does not understand that one of the basic causes of poverty, and particularly women, particularly in the world, is their inability to control their sexual reproductive bodies? Yeah. So all I'm saying is we could just go on and on with Bernie Sanders. Everybody thought Bernie was great, and Bernie was better than our two choices that we've already talked about. But Bernie is against capitalism. Does he talk about patriarchy or in our country racism enough? No. So Does it make sense to support him as anti-capitalist? Yes. Does it make sense to mobilize dissident resistance, saying that an understanding here must include patriarchy and racism? I think absolutely. Okay, so are we kind of getting the theme here? Yeah? So the idea of seeing as big as you can. And my sadness is I know beforehand that we can't see big enough ever, but we can get really close. You know? A lot of white people just think in the world system that they can't know and therefore won't try to know what an imperial, patriarchal, hetero-capitalist system, how it punishes people. But I argue we can get almost close enough. And that close is big enough to create solidarity. Okay? All right, so I am arguing here that the moment is urgent, and the urgency comes from the extremes of the moment we inhabit. And those extremes are enormously punishing, where a majority of this globe is poverty-stricken, and too much of the globe is defined in war, with so many of those who create war not really having to pay the price of that. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is just have a moment of a method for seeing. And so for me, the method should always be as inclusive as you can view something. And what I'd like to offer here is an intellectual guide that is not usually understood or accepted. Most of the time it's thought that if you're being inclusive, you speak about universals. Everybody, everyone, humanity. You know, when people say, oh, I'm not a feminist, I'm a humanist, as though humanist is what? More inclusive than being a feminist looking at what? From the female body. My argument is if you look at the female body in its context, in terms of indigeneity, in terms of color and race, in terms of sex, in other words, get as specific as you can about the female body, you meet those needs, you will be as inclusive as possible. No one is excluded. Because why? You have been absolutely as explicitly specific and contextual as you can be. So the point here is that, I don't know, we've spent most of what, the last century, trying to make the idea of individual rights or human rights or democracy inclusive. In other words, to include those who have been excluded. And I'm saying it doesn't work. In this sense, bourgeois, patriarchal democracy does not work. How many years do we have to do it to say it does not work? So let's flip it. Instead of starting on the universal and the general, let's start on the specific. You can't get more specific than a female body. Why is that? The female body does do something that no other body does. So if you can meet the needs of a body that might need an abortion or might need help with a pregnancy, no one's excluded. That doesn't create a problem for a man or for someone choosing not to use their body in this way, okay? Or for those women who have no choice about the specificity of their body in times of war, in terms of rape camps. So the idea here is I'm asking you to flip the notion, to go big by being specific, and being as specific as possible, you get as inclusive as possible. That is a rewriting of democratic theory from revolutionary feminism. So what am I arguing here? Feminism must use feminism to become revolutionary. And in this urgent moment, nothing else will do. Reform is not sufficient. Connecting reforms to revolutionary commitments, that might be, but we don't know that yet. So the old dialogue in Marxism between reform and revolution, not that helpful at the moment. Historically, was it? Yeah. Today, I don't think so. And also, you don't have the neat divide between reform and revolution if capitalism is not your base. The minute your base is bigger, that it's patriarchal, hetero systems of racism, of capitalism, if that's your start, then if you reform one of those, you don't know what's happening, what the effect of the structure is. So what we have to understand here is that language never helps feminism, because why? No, I shouldn't, wrong. Political language never helps feminism, because why? Women's bodies were not even seen. The system of patriarchy not seen. It is invisible in the language, the existing political language, whether it's Marxism, whether it's liberalism. All of political language is to talk about what to do about the public sphere. The female body is outside it. And I don't, you know, we can talk about trans bodies. My female body is fluid and moving. But the point is it is not denied. Okay? So again, I don't want some kind of false binary put in here, slipped in when we say female bodies. They are too complex, never knowing what the outcome of them can be politically. All right? So then I'll just take you to the most recent organizing that I've done, which was just this last March 8th for the International Women's Strike. And we organized in the United States in support of 40 other countries around the world, many of them who are way ahead of us in terms of organizing strikes, etc. But what we did was say, do not use your traditional political language to tell us that women cannot strike here, that we will not be effective, that women cannot mobilize themselves. And we did prove them wrong. We did organize, but we organized newly, creatively, and as I said to some people last night at dinner, we reinvented the meaning of strike to really embrace the multiple and different kinds of labor that women do that cannot be understood if you're thinking about a factory. And to be honest, in the United States, we don't have a lot of factories left. So again, the idea of let's talk about what really is. So who are our laborers in the US? Home care aides, predominantly women of color from all over the globe. Who are our workers? Restaurant workers, migrants, all over the world. The idea right now that one of the big movements in the US is to create sanctuaries for restaurant workers because so many of them are immigrants at great risk of deportation. So the idea here is when you use that word working class, do me a favor. Who are you talking about? Okay? Now people, again, in the US, some of our left were very quick to say, there is not enough concern for the white working class male who was really hurt. And they voted for Trump because they needed change. And I love all working class people, men alike, My partner's father was a coal miner. So the idea here of embracing all our workers always, absolutely, never say that I am excluding any person's labor. But the predominant labor of the globe right now is done by women and girls. So the new proletariat, if we're going to use that language, the new proletariat is women and girls. And some people would say, and I probably would agree, not that new. Okay? So again, the idea of intellectual lag, I mean, our houses of education are not keeping up. We're not keeping up. So today I just wanted to say to you, keep up. You know, think about what are you seeing and what isn't making sense to you. And instead of thinking it must be making sense, it's not. So make sense of it politically with actions that matter and can have effect. Okay, so I'm just going to take another minute and then we'll see what you want to talk about. All right? So Antonio Gramsci, he said the old is dying and the new cannot be born. And I'm saying the new is in process. And it's particularly for you young people, figure it out, do something. And you lead me. I'll be right behind you, okay? So the idea here is to try to move away from rigid structures, both of politics and of imagination, and really try to understand the difficulty of this. So much has changed, so little has changed. Everything has changed. Not enough has changed. Each is true. What to do? Thank you.